Go.
Hi, today we're going to talk about Plato's Allegory of the Cave. This is a pictorial representation of Plato's Allegory of the Cave. We're going to speak of Plato's Allegory of the Cave in three parts. This is part one, the literal interpretation. Now, if we think about what Aristotle said about stories in general, stories always begin with some type of a complication, something to set the story in motion. Most of you will remember from grammar school the rising action of a story. Here's the complication, whatever it was that got the story started. We have rising action, we have a climactic moment where everything is tense in the story, and we have falling action, or what's also referred to as the denouement. Now, in Plato's Allegory of the Cave, if we look at this story literally, here's what we see. We see a group of prisoners, and they've been chained up in this cave their entire lives. They're facing the wall of the cave. And then we find someone comes in, and it's interesting because Plato refers to this person as the instructor. Now, it's not actually Plato referring to this person. Plato's recording this conversation. It's Socrates referring to this person as the instructor. The conversation in Plato's Allegory of the Cave is between Socrates and his student Glaucon. So the instructor comes in, releases one of the prisoners, and what the text says about this release, the text says that at first, when any of them is liberated and compelled suddenly to stand up and turn his neck round and walk and look towards the light, he will suffer sharp pains. That's pretty strong language to use. For a prisoner, it says that he is compelled to walk toward the light. He is forced, essentially, to look at the fire, to look at the light of the cave, and he's suffering sharp pains. Because compelled is such a strong word, we realize that these prisoners have no idea that they're imprisoned. So this prisoner who's been staring at shadows on the back of the cave wall his whole life suddenly moves toward the fire, moves toward the light. Now he sees this bright light, and of course it hurts his eyes naturally. He sees these objects that these people have been carrying. These people have been carrying these objects, but he has no idea what this object is. This is a real object to him. This has no meaning to him. But as he moves forward, the instructor pushes him a little bit further, and it says essentially in the text that he is reluctantly dragged up a steep and rugged ascent and is held fast until he is forced into the presence of the sun. So this prisoner has to be forced even further into the light. The prisoner, once he's outside, what does the text say he sees first? The text says that he doesn't look at everything, he can only first see the shadows. So he sees the shadow of the tree. Why does he see the shadow first? Because that's what's familiar to him. He's familiar with the shadows of the cave. Likewise, in our own lives, what we are familiar with, that's what we recognize first in a strange environment. Next, after the shadows, he sees the reflection on the water. It's two-dimensional like the shadow, but it takes on a little bit of color. Next, he starts to comprehend the objects themselves. The text says then he understands the moon and the stars, and finally he apprehends the sun. Now, if we look at this on the literal level, not much is really going on in this text. Prisoner is forced out of a cave. He looks at some objects, the shadow, the sun, and then in the text it says he goes back. And Plato talks about some games the prisoners are discussing and what they're playing. We'll talk about that in part 3.